All right, I'm here with Susan Boles, founder, fellow solopreneur. We're recording in Boise. Susan, how are you?
I'm good. This is exciting. I'm
I
enjoying the
know.
studio. It feels very swish.
Yes. People who are watching the video can see that I don't cross my legs the right way. It's like below my knee because this is like
Yeah,
I had
this is uncomfortable.
because I'm 100 years old. I had hip surgery when I was 12.
All right.
And so it's like a little uncomfortable for me to sit like this.
Well, I think neither one of us ever show our legs on video.
No,
And we're both wearing shorts.
Yeah, I think
I'm very
people are
conscious of how
probably
white my legs
uncomfortable.
are.
It's like the first time you saw Kermit the Frog's legs.
Yep.
Yeah.
It feels like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're recording here in Boise. Really excited about this. And this is a two-parter. So you're about to hear part one here on Streamline Solopreneur. And then you can catch part two on Susan's podcast, which, Susan, you're going to have to say the name of your podcast.
The podcast is called Calm is the New KPI.
Love it. I'll include everything in the show notes, which you can find over at streamlined.fm. But we're going to talk mostly about vibe coding, and then that's going to kind of inform the second half of our conversation, right?
Yep, I'm psyched.
Okay, cool. So people who have listened to my show know that I have an episode called I Vibe Coded a Client Project. I have my master's in software engineering, and so it felt a little like cheating. You also have a coding background, right?
Yeah, so my early career was as a data analyst, and one of the additional duties they threw at me was webmaster. And this was in the era of like Dreamweaver was the pinnacle of web coding technology.
Yes, back when they still used the term webmaster.
Correct.
Yes. Cool. Yeah. So for those who may have not heard that previous episode or heard the term vibe coding is essentially just describing the thing that you want coded to AI, and then it writing all of the code for you. You test it, you iterate on it, and I've done it quite a bit now because since leaving the web development space, I've really tried to not code anything because I don't want to create solutions for my clients that they can't recreate or maintain, right? And I don't want to maintain. I never sold premium plugins for WordPress because I never wanted to maintain those software projects. And so I've been a little rusty, but in that episode, I talked about how I underscoped a client project and ChatGPT basically saved me. And maybe this is because it's WordPress code and it's all open source, but it wrote about 2,000 flawless lines of code for me.
So I did not have that experience when I also coded a client project. We were doing a custom reporting project basically in Google Sheets, and we were using Google Scripts to do that. And back in the day, I would have been, writing custom macros essentially to get the reporting to move everything around and, do things in the right format. My experience was very different, but it sounds like so that was probably 5 months ago, where my experience was write the code, test the code doesn't work, go back, rewrite the code, test the code doesn't work, and then go back, and now it's forgotten half of the code.
Right, yeah. So I think we'll talk more about this in part two, the kind of like Google Sheets macro thing. But yeah, the client project, I used ChatGPT and I used it in May.
Okay.
And I was impressed to the point where I think if I was like a junior developer, I'd be scared.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think it can actually be a really great training tool. If you are trying to learn how to code,
right.
I think having, it's essentially pair programming,
right,
but
yeah.
with somebody that you can like ask questions and isn't going to get grumpy or mad at you for asking.
Oh, let me just do it.
I am concerned because I think what we're doing is kind of eliminating the entry-level programming positions, which turns the programmer's responsibility into manager of programmer, but without like the experience of doing the entry-level stuff. And so while I think it's fine now,
right.
What happens in 10 years when all the entry-level developers never got to learn the entry-level skills, and then you get to the middle, the middle part of your career, and you don't have the experience to manage the code because you never got to break stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, right? Because like, I mean, when I was getting my master's, like we were doing threads with multiple programs that are running simultaneously, essentially. And if you do it the wrong way, you will crash the server, right?
Yep.
And like, you definitely want to do that in an academic environment, right? You don't want to do that in real life. I mean, the other thing is like, I've had managers who used to code and then didn't code and then thought they could code. One straight up said to me, she's like, look, I know what I'm talking about. Like, I used to code in COBOL. And I'm like, great.
Cool.
Unless you work at NASA, people didn't use COBOL after 1994.
Nope.
Right? And so, like, you're right that I think that we are losing some experience there. Where I think it could be helpful if taught the right way is a lot of junior developers just want to code without fully understanding the project.
Yes.
And I think that if you're forced to describe the project to AI first, you can understand it a little bit better. Or hopefully you would.
I think you're right. It gives you the bigger picture. You're understanding like, where does this sit in the organization or in the project?
Yeah.
What's the, ultimately it forces you to have a bigger picture, where I think a lot of the times, whether we're talking software or at a business organization level, I think it is sometimes really difficult to get people from like their little tiny piece of whatever the thing is to the bigger picture and where it sits and why it's important.
Right.
And I think you're right. I think forcing people at the beginning of the project to have to define the scope and have to define where it, like what the point is,
right,
I think does have characteristics that are beneficial.
I think this is maybe top of mind because as we record this, it's WWDC keynote day. And Apple is criticized for this because they seem to do things in a silo because they don't want things leaking, right? And so like Siri integration, I'm sorry, I just activated a bunch of listeners' phones probably. Their voice assistant, not every app has built features or integrations for it or for shortcuts. And that seems like a super weird thing that like a native Apple app doesn't have good shortcuts integration because, or good voices. Just
I could
mute
see
your HomePods,
not
I guess.
having the voice activation piece, because that's one of those where, when AI started coming out and all the software companies were like, we're putting AI in there. And I'm like, is there a reason? What's the reason to put AI in there if AI doesn't, just so we could say that we have AI?
Right. But with their journal, with their journal app, right? It would be great if I could say, hey, assistant, journal.
I agree would be super useful.
Which you might be able to do now. You could not when I last tried it. And like, as we record this, I'm in the middle of my next LinkedIn Learning course, which is, I wrote the table of contents and the course blueprint for this back in January. So like a lot has changed. And like vibe coding was not a term that was at least being thrown around as much as it is now.
Nope. Literally. So you did your project in March, I think, or in May. I think I did mine in March.
Right.
And that was it wasn't a term that existed. Right. Like, yes, people were using AI to assist in coding.
Right.
But that was developers were using AI to help them write and debug and like refine code, not non-programmers using AI to code new things entirely.
Yes. And so the scope of this course, when we designed it, was building a movie database with a generative AI, right?
Okay.
Building a movie database is one of my favorite. This is the thing I always taught in like my Comp Sci 101 courses. I just think it's a really good academic problem because you have multiple databases. You need to build a simple admin. It could be a very simple CRUD app, which is create, read, update, just delete, right? That's how you interact with the database. But it could also get super complicated.
It could be very cool and very interactive.
Like you could build IMDb, right? And so like really good academic problem or project. And as I started writing the scripts, now months later, I'm like, writing scripts is kind of pointless because I'm going to vibe code this whole project. From the I'm like, I'm thinking about doing this. These are the requirements I need. What am I not thinking about? Let's create a requirements document. Let's do something that junior.
The process is totally different.
Yes, something that junior developers definitely don't do, because I didn't even learn about it until my master's program, was user stories and use cases. So I'm like, let's create some user stories and use cases for this document. Based on the user stories, what do I need? Let's mock it up. Let's create the templates. Let's build the ERD for the database, the entity relationship diagram, which is how you plan the database. And it's just like really interesting. Like the way I envisioned this course 6 months ago
is totally,
so different.
I don't even know, like at this point in time, how you would manage to build a course that keeps up with the speed of how fast everything is moving.
Yeah. And so it's like, I know it's going to be popular because all of my AI coding courses are popular.
Oh, for sure.
And like drive most of my royalties. But like, this is going to, hey, we're doing this project right now. Keep the principles in mind.
Yeah.
Like is basically what I'm saying. Now I will say before we wrap up here and move over to your part 2 of this, I did have like a recent kind of vibe coding horror story with Claude. Claude, by and large, I think creators consider better because it's like more creative.
I repeatedly do get told that I should be switching to Claude.
Yeah, I've moved over to Claude. It's fine. I think it's like ChatGPT does feel sometimes like the more you use it, the more generic it gets. And this might be any AI, right? Like,
so I have found the opposite. The reason that I'm still on ChatGPT is because I was an early adopter, and now I've done so much training with it that it can almost be me sometimes. And so it feels really hard to switch, because I feel like now I have to redo all of that training. That being said, in the last, 3 weeks, I've been arguing with it because it just seems to forget things. But that's really interesting. I will say, so I this Claude project I created, I basically asked it to create the instructions for the project. Okay.
And then I said, what supporting documents do you need? And I just fed all of them in. And so it's like a business development and product development project. Because like I feel like up until yesterday, as we record this, like I felt like my positioning was bad. And I feel like I struggle with it a lot. And like between the conversation with Claude and our friend Austin Church, I felt like I really nailed down the positioning.
Yep.
But one of the things was like, I'm trying to build my mailing list. I need a better opt-in. And it's like, yeah, let's do like an overwhelm diagnostic quiz. And I'm like, cool. So it like created the quiz and the grading. And then it's like, do you want me to code the quiz for you? And it created an HTML and JavaScript. And it was beautiful, like gorgeous. I just wanted to use it. And I was like, but I need to connect this to ConvertKit or Kit. Kit, formerly ConvertKit. And it's like, yeah. Just drop the form in here. And hey, if you want to send the answers as custom fields, we can do that too. Like, we'll just do that really quick. And I'm like, oh yeah, do that. So it did. It wrote the code, and then it said, put your API key here. And this is what spawned the blog post. Like, AI is great if you already know what you're doing.
If you already know what you're doing.
Because guaranteed, if someone who's not a programmer saw that, they would just
freak out.
Or they would just put their API key in the HTML and JavaScript.
Oh, yeah.
Which is plain text. And so I said, should I be putting my API key in plain text? And it's like, no, good catch. Let's do some server-side stuff. And I was like, you know what? Let's turn this into a WordPress plugin. Really dumb. This is part of why it's a horror story, because I just wanted the quiz. I used gravity forms in WordPress, but I liked so much the design that Claude came up with that I just wanted to use that exact form. And so I ended up creating like a Gravity Forms Lite plugin. that like created.
What I love about this is only a developer would do that.
Right.
Right? Like nobody off the street is like, turn this into some software. This thing glitched, so I'm just gonna write my plugin.
So like, and this is what happened, right? I was like, well, I mean, if I'm gonna do server-side code anyway, I can add it into WordPress, and I can generate the form, and then that worked. And I was like, but I want a contingency plan because I'm not using a Kit native form. And like, what if the API changes or fails? I should really be writing it to the WordPress database too. And so I'm like, can you write a function or write it to the WordPress database? And like, at that point, I was like, what am I doing? And I just recreated the form in Gravity Forms because that's the smart thing to do because they actively maintain their API, which shouldn't change. APIs should not change.
Shouldn't change,
often.
but sometimes they do.
Yeah, like who knows, right? But like Gravity Forms has the contingencies built in and a better analytics and stuff like that. And I was just like, okay, so the security issue was one thing, and then the JavaScript didn't work. And Claude, I was like, this doesn't work. And it's like, oh, let's build in some debugging. The debugging was useless.
Yep.
And I was like, so I had to end up debugging it.
That is where I think, yes, sometimes it's doing a really good job on vibe coding.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get complete nothingness.
Right.
Where you're like, that's not even anything I can debug. I have to start over from scratch because clearly you don't have any idea what you're doing.
Which I do feel about like half the things it writes for me too.
Yeah.
If I'm like,
totally.
I don't know what to say, can you write something? I'm like, I can't use this. It's a great assistive tool. You know, my favorite podcast is Cortex. It's you can find it at relay.fm. But one of the hosts is CGP Grey, who got big on YouTube doing like these informational videos. And he vibe coded an iOS app. And he like said, he's like, I'm breaking the cardinal rule, which is don't let a program just generate code for you and use it sight unseen. But he's convinced that like developer will not be a job in 10 years. And I have a hard time believing that because
somebody's got to decide what the software does.
Yes.
Like somebody has to have taste to decide what this thing is.
Yes.
And I don't think we're going to be able to train AI to do tasks for us.
Right.
I'm not sure we're ever going to be able to train it to have taste because all it does is replicate what already exists. So if you want to do something interesting or unique or different, it can't do that because all it has is information about what has been done before. And that's what it's basing all of its information on.
It's certainly not going to make something that has personality.
Nope.
Right? Like it's going to just regurgitate the most common things. Even if it gets super smart, it's still learning based on source material, right? And it's like, you know, Nathan said this today in his fireside chat as we record. I'm really timestamping this episode. But he said, like, don't copy people in your industry. Look at other industries. And I'm really glad he said that because, like, I have a bunch of posts on this about, like, stop reading only business books. Like, it really gives you a narrow view of the world. If you run a business, like, read some fiction sometimes. But, you know, like, it's even if ChatGPT or AI get like really good at recreating good websites, right? Like Lovey is like a website vibe coding thing, and my friend Adam like says it's amazing, and it created a project that I would have charged $30,000 for. And I believe him. I don't know if it's apocryphal, but like I do believe that. But like, is it going to stand out?
No, because eventually everybody's going to be doing everything via vibe coding. And if you are relying on something that inherently is based on what's been done, is just regurgitating what's been done before, and you lose the innovative, interesting piece. And I feel like it's just a bigger version of what we currently deal with, which is like all SaaS websites all look the same. And then one SaaS company has a different design, and then all of a sudden everybody else looks just like that.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I think it'll be great if the single person needs a utility for something specific.
I think it's going to be really good at helping people who have cool ideas execute cool ideas.
Yes. It will not be something to base a business on, I don't think. I don't think the result of vibe coding is something that you should like seek funding for. Like like stuff like that. Like I think that
I think you can get to beta testing quicker.
Totally.
You can test ideas and
concept,
experiment. But I think
yes, you can iterate
it's also
quickly.
a really expensive way to go about running a software or running your business.
Right. Yeah. So super interesting. So this is where we're gonna wrap for part 1. So I'll link to part 2 in the description. But I loved this conversation. We're gonna get into case studies over on Susan's podcast. So Susan, thanks so much for joining me for part 1 here
Thanks
on the
for having
Solopreneur. Thank you so much for listening and or watching. Definitely check out the YouTube video for this one because we are in a very swanky studio. I will link that in the show notes.
You could see our legs.
Yes, you could see we're not just Muppets without legs. Let me know what you think of vibe coding. You can go to streamlinedfeedback.com. That's streamlined with a D, feedback.com. Thanks again so much for listening. And until next time, I hope you find some space in your week.